Good evening, everybody. My name is Blumenthal. Can somebody give a thumbs up and just make sure that you hear me? Great. Okay. Um, and it's my privilege. I'm the director of bereavement crisis intervention for Ohel Children's Home and Family Services. And tonight I'm presenting on navigating grief during the holidays. A difficult and delicate topic. I want to start by thanking our CEO, David Mendel, and our presidium of Jay Kestenbaum and Mel Zachter, who make this possible for us to give these webinars. And also want to thank my crisis team specifically, Sivi Ryder and Cheryl Chernovsky, who work very closely and have been able to provide so many of the crisis services that were so essential during these last few months. The way it's going to work, we have a pretty big crowd. I see we already have 56 people on, so it doesn't lend itself to people just sort of jumping in and talking. So the most effective way that we have learned to take questions, comments, etc., is through the chats. There is a chat option. If you're on your computer, it's on the bottom of your screen. I don't know exactly where it would be if you're on the phone, but there should be a chat option. You have basically one of three choices if you submit a chat question or comment. You can post it to everybody, and everyone will know it's coming from you. If that's what you want, that's fine. If you'd like it not to be known that your question or comment is coming from you, you can send it privately to me. From time to time, I will check the chats and respond to questions, comments, etc. And if it's from a private person, I obviously won't divulge who the question is from. And the third option is if you want to discuss something or if you have a question and you neither want it to be known nor do you want it read publicly, it's just something you want me to address privately, please indicate that in the chat, and at some later point I will get in touch with you and we can discuss that matter. So as we talk, I think the title, even though I would love to take credit for coming up with it, sorry, so someone's helping us out in terms of where the chat is on the phone. Okay, thank you. Okay, the title's a very good one. I would love to take credit for having composed it, but I didn't, because we really do navigate grief. We don't get rid of grief. We don't get over grief. We don't heal. I mean, we heal from it, but we don't heal from it like we would, let's say, an infection and take an antibiotic and it's gone. Grief is with us, any kind of loss, and any loved one who's not here anymore, the void, the hole in our heart doesn't disappear. But we learn how to, within the realm of what it has to offer, we navigate it. It's again, just like we would navigate an automobile, a boat, etc. We try to see what we can do with the emotions of grief and how we can most effectively negotiate it, manage it for ourselves and for those around us. Now, the grief we didn't specify. This is not just for people who have lost loved ones in the last few months from the COVID. This could be people who lost loved ones from other type of ailments, or it could be people who have lost loved ones years ago. It doesn't necessarily mean parents. It could be spouses. It could be children. It could be siblings. It could even be a close friend or a close number of friends. All the people that are important to us are their absence is felt, and as I'm going to explain shortly, their absence is felt most poignantly during any kind of time that we typically gather together with friends and family, etc. I sometimes when I have to speak about this topic, I begin with sort of a disclaimer or apology. So I hope I don't sound too clinical. I hope I don't sound too much like a psychologist. I know I'm touching some raw nerves. I'm speaking to some very painful memories and experiences, and I'll try not to lose sight of that. But I hope that it's so. As you know, I'm my best. But if I do sound more kind of scholarly or clinical, I apologize. Besides the fact that we're dealing with different kinds of losses, different people, different times. It could be a loss many, many years ago, and as maybe we'll discuss, you don't get over it. Nechama does not mean forgetting about that the person isn't here. Nechama doesn't mean that you don't feel their absence. So it could be even from a long time ago. And even if we were to, let's say, by some statistical fluke, everybody on this line had lost the same kind of person, be it a parent, spouse, child, sibling, and around the same time period. Everybody's grief is unique, just like everybody's relationships with people and with their family members is unique. So is everybody's grief a unique experience. I have done this work now for 25 years, hundreds, if not thousands of people with different types of losses, and everybody's experience of loss and everybody's emotions. There may be some overlaps, but each one is unique. And as I said, as unique as our relationships are with all these people. The Navi and Eicha put it very well. Hayesh machov k'machovi. Is there a pain like my pain? And there isn't. Everybody's pain is unique. The other thing about grieving that it's important to know, and it's relevant, particularly now, is that nobody stays in an intense state of grief consistently over a period of time. Not only does it evolve over time, but grief is something that everybody feels all the time, but they feel it more intensely at certain periods. There is an in and out experience. Excuse me. So it does have an element of coming and going, sort of, even though you never forget and you never lose sight of the absence of loved ones, but it is felt more poignantly at sometimes, and even without triggers, if you will, like holidays. It's something you visit and leave and visit and leave. There's a common line I hear from people who are grieving when they're talking about the persons, and here's that we meet their absence everywhere. And the absence is felt, but there are certain times or circumstances where you confront their absence in a more pronounced way. And as I alluded to earlier, Yom Tov and times of family gatherings are those times, as are birthdays, anniversaries, Father's Day, Mother's Days, when contemporaries of the loved one who died meet new milestones. All of those are times when you confront your pain and your loss all the more. But holidays are one of them. Yom Tovim are typically times that we get together. Yom Tovim are typically times when we focus on who is in our lives, even if it's a Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, which are not normally associated with a whole lot of socializing and family gathering. Who are we davening for? Who are we thinking about when we're in shul? And when the people that we typically think about and daven for are not with us here, we feel it all the more. Now, I'm not here to cheer you up. I can't. That's not my job. I'm here to validate experiences and give you some ways in which I have learned from the people I've spoken to, ways in which you can make the loss one that enhances a Yom Tov or enhances the meaningfulness of the Yom Tov, or can be take something that sometimes seems so senseless and not necessary, and make it into something meaningful and therefore more manageable. I often remember, and I'm going to say it very cryptically because I don't want to divulge who the person was, but for a year I witnessed a situation of someone who had lost a child in very tragic circumstances, and he happened to daven in the minyan. I was davening at that time, and I davened near the rabbi. And every morning after davening, people would sort of stand in line to talk to the rabbi, ask him questions, things, and he would stand there. When he came to the rabbi, he'd say, "I want my child back." And the rabbi would say to him, "If I could bring your child back, I would." And they had that conversation every morning for an entire year. And it was an interesting thing. Well, like, what was the point? Why have that same conversation? But it was a validation. It was a validation of how much this person pined for his child and how helpless we are with such matters. But the rabbi didn't try to make that pain go away. He validated it, and he shared with him the wish that he could undo probably one of the aspects of life that are the hardest to undo. So I'm not going to try to cheer you up. I'm going to validate your pain. I'm going to maybe think of ways in which it can be somewhat diminished or channel it towards more profundity and meaning. And let's clarify once and for all, what really matters in life are people. It doesn't, more than anything else. I may have, and I apologize if some people have listened to my presentations and some of this may be a repetition, but some findings, studies, stories bear repetition. About, I'm guessing 20 years ago, or a little bit more maybe, psychologists woke up one morning and said, you know what? We've spent years and years studying why people are sad, why people are depressed. Why don't we study why people are happy? And so they did a huge international study to figure out what is associated with happiness. Now, they couldn't call it happiness. That doesn't sound scientific. So they called it SWB, subjective well-being, happiness. And they came up with the 3 Fs, 3 things that start with F. If this was face-to-face, maybe I challenge you to come up with the 3 Fs, but I'll sort of give it to you. And the 3 things they found in this very large international study that are associated with happiness are friends, family, and this is the surprising one, faith. Now, how do you measure faith? You know, you can't measure what's in somebody's heart. They measured faith by membership in a house of worship. So if you're a member of a shul, a church, a mosque, that was how they measured faith. So now let's look at what we used to call in Yeshiva, Tzad Shava B'neihem. What is the common denominator? Friends, membership in a house of worship, and I'm sure you figured out. If you have close family ties, if you have a cohesive circle of friends, and you have a communal affiliation, you are a happy person. It doesn't matter how much money you have, it doesn't matter how much you travel, it doesn't matter what kind of car you drive. That's what matters in life. And when one of those connections is compromised, and one of those connections are in some way severed, we are in pain and we are diminished. And again, this is much more brought to the forefront when we're in family gatherings, when it's the place and the setting that this person should be there, and their presence was so integral, their absence is felt profoundly. And I have to say, because unfortunately over the last few months, as we're dealing with the losses to COVID, we have dealt with a lot of widows, widowers, and I think that has a very special meaning on the Yom Tov, because when someone who has been your lifelong partner, and someone has been by your side for most of your life, and for things that are important, and for all that's surrounding you, as you sit in the sukkah, or you sit at the Yom Tov table, it's the absences. It's almost like everything you've done has been shared. It's almost like trying to drive a car with just 2 wheels, and it's all the more difficult, especially if it's in the early experience of this time. And by the way, I'm going to speak probably for about another 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions and comments. So, please, we'll leave time for that. And by the way, the pain you feel, this is so, so important. The pain you feel is legitimate and is necessary. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of a lack of faith. We have this mishigas in our community that being stoic and being unemotional is a sign of strength. Yeah, you hear all the time, oh, he's so strong, he didn't cry. It doesn't make sense to me, and it's not the way we were made or created by God to be unemotional. If we need any other better proof, we can look in Parshas Bereshis at the Avos and Imahos, and we can hope to only remotely replicate their levels of faith and connection to Hashem, and they cried. Avram Avinu, Vayvo Avraham, L'spotus Rabba Lifkosai, he cried when Sarah died. In fact, Rav Joseph Ber Soloveitchik points out that after Sarah's death, we don't really read much about anything Abraham had done. I mean, he gets a shidduch for Yitzchak, and that's pretty much it. And he said without Sarah by his side, he could not continue his remarkable work, his proselytizing, everything that he did, because he didn't have his wife by his side. Yaakov, when he thought Yosef was dead, he grieved terribly. These are not weak people. They were scared. They were frightened. They were traumatized. It's all there in Chumash. We were created as emotional people, and if you are in pain, the pain is not a sign of weakness. In fact, in some respects, it's a sign of strength. I remember once, a number of years ago, somebody who had lost a young adult child very suddenly and called me during the Shloshim, someone from out of town, and said to me that she's so weak. So that she said she was in the department store, she couldn't even push the door, those rotating doors. I'm like, I can't push those doors either. But, she said she's so weak. And I said to her, that's because you're strong. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, so let me give you a mashal, let me give you a parable. Imagine the strongest person in the world, okay, a Russian weightlifter, a guy has muscles all over him. He has steroids for breakfast, steroids for lunch, and steroids for supper. He's just all muscle. He's about to break the world record. And he's lifting the darn thing, and he's panting, and he's red, and he's out of breath, and he's sweating, and every vein is popping out of his body, and he just about gets that thing up, drops it, and faints from exhaustion. Is he weak or is he strong? You're facing something so painful, and you're letting it in. You're letting the pain in. That's your strength. So pain is necessary. Pain is part of grief, and you don't run away from it, and this doesn't diminish you if this is a painful Yom Tov, even if it's a sukkah and you're supposed to be happy. And pain, but Hashem gave us pain not just to suffer. He gave it us the pain that we should use it, and we should grow from it and try to get somewhere so we can manage it or be in any way possible better people. And it's an alarm. It's like a wake-up call. Just like physical pain means something has to be fixed. If you have a pain in your arm, you go to the doctor. Why do I have my pain in my arm? Let's fix that. Emotional pain is the same thing. It's something we have to address. Again, we don't get rid of it, but it's something that we have to address. And one thing is, there is a void here. In fact, it almost would be an insult to your loved one if you weren't in pain. If you could just, the person cannot be here and it wouldn't make much of a difference. This year, our letter carrier, who we've had for years and years, was suddenly replaced. I didn't grieve. I mean, he was very nice. He put the mail in and he very graciously accepted our Christmas present, but there was no connection. It's a reflection of the depth of the relationship and the closeness that you're in pain. So what can you do, and what would be ways to cope and manage this as best as possible? First of all, bring your loved one to the Yom Tov table. Bring them into the sukkah. This is a theme that we've emphasized again and again, and it can't be said enough. When a loved one or a friend or family member dies, the relationship doesn't end. It changes. It changes from a face-to-face relationship to a relationship of memories, to a relationship of life lessons, a relationship of legacies, which, as I always say, that's one of the, not that Chazal need my support, that's one of the brilliance of Shiva. Because if you do Shiva right, which means that you will talk about the person who died, you're launching that whole process of shifting the relationship from a face-to-face relationship to a relationship of memories, an internalized relationship. And yes, you can bring your parent, your spouse, your child, your sibling, your friend to the Yom Tov table, to the Shabbos table. You can bring them to the sukkah. You can preserve their minhagim. You can sing their songs, their favorite songs. You can tell over their insights, their wisdom, their divrei Torah. You can tell their jokes, and you can laugh. That's a way of grieving as well. Many people are quite amusing and funny, and to tell over their witticisms is a way of bringing them to the table. You can even talk to them. I will not do that in front of everybody else, but in your heart and in your mind's eye. We know they exist. We know they're in Gan Eden. You can wish them a good Yom Tov. You can tell them what you davened for this Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. You can point around the table and look who's here. Look how many people who love you, care about are here. You can wish them a good Yom Tov. And you can make sure, and you can also make sure for everyone else there that their presence is here, that they haven't disappeared, by telling over the stories, by thinking about it, by crying. You can also include them and make them part of the Yom Tov in the way, in the fashion that we do after someone has left this world. And it's true that their physical presence is gone, but their memories and their spirit are still here. And that can diminish and make it more manageable because you're not so terribly alone. It's also, by the way, I think, an amazing opportunity to test ourselves in terms of our connection to Hashem and our willingness to sacrifice for Hashem. Because as I said, the pain's there. And yet, interestingly enough, if you if you have some familiarity with the halachos of Avelis, every once in a while, Hashem tells us, yes, you need to cry, yes, you need to grieve, but there are days, mitzvahs, parts of what I'm commanding you that are more important than your grief. Many of you may know people, and some may apply to some of you, who have had losses on an Erev Yom Tov. And you might have had an hour or two Shiva, and the Shiva is over. And it's a deprivation. It's a terrible deprivation. Even the Shiva on Zoom was a deprivation, but it's a terrible deprivation. But Hashem says to us, you know what? My holiday is more important than your grief. And you have to sacrifice, you have to forego your grief for my holiday. And that's not easy. That's incredibly difficult. Or for that matter, some people have lost loved ones on the holiday, and they have to wait for the holiday to be over before they even can commence the grief. And that's excruciatingly difficult. How do you remain happy? How do you remain celebratory when your world has fallen apart? But the truth of the matter is, it's interesting. Somebody once wrote an article about couples, and they said, we always talk about marriage, how you have to compromise. I don't know if there are any lawyers here online, but compromise, a lawyer will tell you a good compromise is when both parties walk away miserable. It's not compromise, it's sacrifice. We forego things for people we love. We sacrifice for those who we love. And when we try to diminish our grief for the sake of the holiday, when we park our grief for the sake of holiday, we're making a sacrifice. It's a carbon. We're making a sacrifice to Hashem. And it's our way of sort of saying to Hashem, as important as this person is and as much pain I'm in, I'm letting go of it, partially probably, not completely, for your holiday. And that's an incredible experience. It's an incredibly profound religious experience, and one that potentially you could model for others around you, or just between you and Hashem. Can really show the level of depth of connection that you have, or commitment to God's mitzvahs. The other thing is also, by the way, and I hope this won't be taken the wrong way, but it's an opportunity for you to role model. Role model what grief really is, to teach the rest of us what meaningful grieving is. It's part of life. Losses are part of life. There's no way to get to live a full life without experiencing losses. They tell a story that somebody, when Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky was sitting Shiva once, someone was leaving and said, you should only have smachos, you should only have happy occasions. And he said to him, you're wishing me dead. There's no such thing as only happiness. Life is a mixture. Hopefully it's more happiness than pain, but life is a mixture. And grief is part of it. And if you're grieving someone and family members are there, particularly if they're younger, more impressionable family members, you can show the rest of us how to grieve with dignity, how to grieve with propriety, how to grieve in such a fashion that you preserve the life of the person instead of despairing about the person's absence. And how do you celebrate? How do you celebrate a Yom Tov without denying or minimizing how painful this is? And you can talk about it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not necessarily downer. You can talk about what a challenge it is. You can talk about the mixture of feelings that you have, which in both happiness because of the holiday or profundity because of the holiday, and at the same time, the profoundness of the emptiness. And it's good for you to talk about it, because anytime you talk about an emotion, it becomes more manageable, but it also is a role model for all those around you. And as I said, it's part of life. And talk about the person. That's not necessarily a sad experience, as I indicated earlier. Talk about him or her in Gan Eden, watching, enjoying, getting nachas. What do you think they're doing, or what are they thinking, or what are they saying? And most importantly, and I think this is something we have to do more of, is tell their stories. A story is a remarkable way to preserve the memory of a person. If you think, what's a story? What does a story mean? A story is a few words, is a few sentences, and it captures who this person is. I'm just recalling as I speak about one, just to give you an example. I remember one family who unfortunately lost a child, and it was right before a Yom Tov. And this child needed to have certain types of transfusions that only a trained medical person could give. And there was a nurse who was a friend, and she volunteered to do it so she could be home for the Yom Tov. And the first day that she came and she did this medical procedure, it was terribly painful. And the child was suffering so much so that the nurse that was administering this medical treatment began to cry. The next day, the nurse came back to administer it, and the child didn't manifest. It was a young child, it was an 8 or 9 year old, didn't manifest any pain. Didn't display any pain. And the parents said afterwards, oh, obviously this wasn't as painful. She said, no, it hurt just as much. She said, why didn't you cry? Why didn't you think? I said, I saw how much I upset the nurse. I didn't want to upset her again. That child, you don't know who she is. She's walking in front of you now. You know her. You met her. And a story just like that, you can retell. And everybody has stories. Everybody has their various triumphs, their various life experiences. And that can be and that can be celebratory. It does not have to be sad. It can be a commemoration. It can be a source of pride. It can be that very good feeling you have when the person who's not here comes alive in front of you. And one more thing, and I'll basically conclude my talk with this, and then we can have input or comments, and this is a very hard thing to hear, but I think it's important, is that those who leave this world and those who are not here, I will say, I'm not sure if all, but pretty consistently want those who are still here to live life to the fullest. It's an interesting phenomena, and I've observed this many times. Sometimes people have a chance to say goodbye. Sometimes people have a chance to have a parting. In fact, sometimes we orchestrate that as a team. We will orchestrate. If death is al pi derech hateva imminent, we will gather the family together, or one by one, to say goodbye. And the most common message of people who are leaving this world to the survivors is, you go on living. Live life to the fullest. Get remarried. Don't stop your education. Don't stop living. Don't deprive yourself. Live life to the fullest. That's what they want. And even though it may be excruciatingly painful, and even though every fiber in your body may not want to go into a yontif, may not want to sit with family members, may not want to go to shul to whatever extent we can nowadays, remembering the person who's not here, remembering your loved one, and remembering that that's what they want, will give you that strength and will energize you to celebrate a Yom Tov, to go to shul, to daven, to do what you have to do despite what's missing. And that if that may be the way, and that might be the impetus that you may need to take on this very big job of, and take on this almost insurmountable mountain of celebrating a Yom Tov when you're in so much pain. I mentioned stories, so I'll conclude with one. Again, I may have told, it's one of my favorite, so I may have told over before, so I apologize if I have. But it's a story I heard from a cousin of mine who was widowed very suddenly at a very young age. I don't want to say specifics to divulge. Again, I don't know how much they want to share, but she told me that while she was sitting Shiva, another young widow came. And I'm talking about, these are very young widows, who also had lost her husband quite suddenly. And she told her the following story. She said, it was a very sudden death, and no sooner had she been notified when it was just a whirlwind of activity. Suddenly everybody's running over, making arrangements. There was, before she knows it, she was at the funeral, and then there was the burial, and then came the Shiva. And of course the Shiva was a Grand Central Station, everybody in and out. And she barely had a chance to sort of absorb or realize what had happened to her. And at the last day of Shiva, her mother said to her, look, you're exhausted. I'm going to take the kids. You can sleep late tomorrow. You need your sleep. I'm taking the kids. You're on your, you can have your sleep. And the next morning, After the shiva, she woke up and suddenly all the emotions came cascading. Suddenly she realized what had just happened to her and what's missing in her life. And she said it was an unbearable pain. She was almost for the first time experiencing the depths and the enormous grief that was unbearable. And she said to herself, you know what? I'm not getting out of bed. I'm going to stay in bed. I'm staying in bed for the rest of my life. I'm not getting out of bed. And that's what she did. She stayed in bed. It was 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. By 10 o'clock, she had to go to the bathroom. She said she's not going to wet herself. So she got up and she went to the bathroom. After she went to the bathroom, she knows her breath was bad. Her mouth was kind of filmy and uncomfortable. So she said, you know what? I'm going to brush my teeth. So she brushed her teeth. Then she knows her eyes were also kind of like crusty, and as often is in the morning, and was uncomfortable. So she said, you know what? I'll wash my face. So she washed her face. She said by that point, she had already gone to the bathroom. She had brushed her teeth. She had washed her face. She couldn't go back to bed. And then it was like a light bulb went on in her head. She said a sudden insight. She said, you know what? God created us in such a way that we can't stay in bed. He anatomically constructed us that we have to get out of bed. He could have made us in such a way that we don't have to go to the bathroom, that we don't have to brush our teeth, that we don't have to wash our face. But that's how he made us, because we're not meant to stay in bed. And that's how she was able to go on with her life. On behalf of all of us in Ohel, I want to end with the wish and the blessing that this will be the last series of Yom Tovim, or maybe even by the time Yom Tov comes, but it should be the last Yom Tovim, that anyone will be alone, that anyone will be missing, and that all future holidays, if not maybe even this year, will be celebrated together in Yerushalayim, replenished and reunited with friends and family.